Welcome to the Indo-German Business Talk, the monthly format hosted by the Indo-German Centre for Business Excellence, where we talk about all sorts of different issues that are pertinent to business relations between India and Germany. And today we will talk about the textile industry, textile business, and circular economy. As usual, I'm joined by a group of experts, both Indian and German experts, who will talk with me about this issue. But as all the regulars know, we will also bring in the audience. So we invite you to join us in the conversation and contribute. And we do that by two ways. One is that we have some questions that we pose to you. And actually, I will present the first one very shortly. And the other is that we invite you to ask your questions to our panelists through a chat function. The system that we use for that is Slido, and you should be able to see at the bottom of the screen, just underneath me, the link and also a QR code. So those are two ways to access Slido. You can already go there, you can post questions, and in a moment I will open up the first question. And the first question that we would ask you, our audience, is which factors hinder the incorporation of circular economy in textile production or consumption? This is a question where you can type in words, your answers. Please do that now while I will continue here introducing our panelists. I'm very glad that we have three wonderful guests here today, and I will begin with Naresh Tyagi. Naresh is a prominent figure in the apparel, textile, and retail industries in India, where he's currently making significant contributions at the company Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail. His expertise spans across business units, fostering innovation, strategic initiatives, and integrating sustainability into business operations. Naresh is deeply involved in environmental and social causes, and he holds leadership roles in global and national platforms such as Cotton 2040, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Welcome to our webinar. Next, we have Angela Heucher. Dr. Heucher is a senior evaluator and team leader at the German Institute for Development Evaluation. With her background in political and social sciences, Dr. Heucher's work focuses on sustainable textile supply chains, human rights, and gender equality in post-conflict contexts. She has a rich history in research, including at the Free University of Berlin and the University of Potsdam, where she contributed significantly to understanding governance in areas with limited statehood. Welcome also to you to our webinar. And finally, we have Pranshu Singhal, who is the founder of Karo Sambhav, and he is a visionary in the realm of circular and EPR solutions. His organization is at the forefront of establishing a comprehensive system for waste management in India, covering e-waste, plastics, batteries, and glass. Pranshu's background includes significant roles at Microsoft and Nokia, and he is recognized as an Aspen Fellow, a Ashoka Fellow, Chevening Gurukul Fellow, and an Aspire Circle Fellow. That's a lot of fellowships. He holds a Master in Environmental Management and Policy from IIIE in Sweden. Pranshu, also welcome to you. Naresh, I would like to start with you. At your company, Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, how have sustainability and environmental initiatives influenced the strategy and the operations of your company?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. If we talk about that sustainability, we started the journey almost a decade back in 2012 and 13. But we were doing earlier also this as a part of unstructured approach, but with the proper plan and strategy, we started in 2013. We call it Re-Earth Program for our tomorrow. And this was kind of with vision that we want to give back more to the ecosystem what we take it from. And that I think was strategic intent. And with that strategic intent, we created that 10 mission and we put leadership to drive the agenda. It was not separate in periphery sustainability agenda. It was part of business discussion and a strategy itself. 10 mission from energy, water, waste, zero waste to landfill, product, packaging, CSR, safety. We try to cover everything whatever is related to that sustainability, because our three pillar of sustainability approach is responsible stewardship. As a responsible organization, what we have to look at beyond compliance and do something which is good for all stakeholders, not only for the selected stakeholder, but for everyone. And second pillar is that co-creating and co-designing and collaborating with something stakeholder, which is good for everyone. And then finally looking into that future proofing, what are the solution and innovation we can drive together to make that change happen. So it was a very simple strategy, and it started ahead of time in 2012, and it was similar to that what we do, the business review, annual, quarterly, and a 3-year plan. By default, in that whole process, it become strategic, and sustainability was part of the business strategy and operation. And the good thing happened that there was no team in sustainability that time. Each mission, 10 mission, one senior leader was given to drive it. And in that way, it became part of our operational excellence. And later on, we extended it as a business excellence activity. And that I would say that sustainability and strategy complement each other. It's not either or, because sustainability is ability to sustain in short term to long term, and the strategy also enable that thing to happen in short term to long term.
Angela, in your evaluation work, have you seen that innovation has had any impact in terms of sustainability for the textiles industry? What are you seeing there?
Well, what we're seeing is in our evaluation on German Development Corporation's efforts in the sustainable textile sector is that there are a multitude of different instruments that German Development Corporation uses. And this is quite important because, as we are all very well aware of, textile supply chains are inherently complex. They span across multiple countries. There are many different actors involved, and the environmental and social challenges abound. So what we see is, like I said, a range of different instruments targeting purchasing companies, targeting textile factories on the ground, targeting consumers. So a very encompassing approach. And I think one of the important measures that are supported is exactly on bringing companies, different stakeholders together in multi-stakeholder partnerships, also as a way to facilitate the transfer, the dissemination of information and also of innovations. And that is one aspect of it. Another aspect, I think, focuses more on the regulatory side. So do we have regulation supporting, for instance, innovations in chemical supply management? So I think these are sort of different aspects, facets, which need to come together in a holistic way. In
your experience, your research, what do you think, what are the biggest challenges or obstacles?
Well, I think in general, there are so many different challenges. I think one side, of course, are the consumers. So do they actually purchase social and environmentally responsibly produced textiles? How easy is it actually as a consumer to know which textiles fulfill certain criteria? There's a sort of a range of different labels, so it can be difficult for the consumer to orient oneself. That's one aspect. There's the aspect of regulation. So in Germany, we now have a law since last year on not just confined to the textile sector, but overall to sustainable supply chains. And this is also an important step because it gives a binding framework for companies which they have to adhere to. So it also levels the playing field a bit because a lot of environmental and social efforts can be more costly. So you now have, binding regulations which apply to a set of companies. And I think you also have a lot of issues pertaining to the textile factories on the ground. For instance, we did a case study of German development cooperation measures in Bangladesh. And we saw that they tried to address the textile factories themselves, the management, that there are measures to support regulatory changes at the national level, and that there are also efforts to support workers, to make them more knowledgeable about their rights, and to support them for also advocating for their basic rights.
Pranshu, you and your organization, you're at the forefront of some of these initiatives when it comes to implementing sustainability. What are those initiatives, and how do you see what Angela and also before Naresh has said from your perspective?
Thank you. And so let me broadly share what the kind of work that we do. So we are a grassroots organization and we focus on material circularity. So we only come at the end of life. When a product has, completely, let's say it has been refurbished, it has been repaired, and it has completed all its cycle. So any extension is no more possible, and it now needs to be either recycled or managed in some form. So three issues that I am seeing as very big, in material circularity. And if I were to go to textile, we have been evaluating this sector. Right now, we are active in 5 different sectors, and textile has always been in consideration. We have not yet, gone big in the sector. The first is, how do you enable collection at scale? And that is what matters, a scale, which means it is easy for people to participate in a collection system. If I have an old cloth, I know where to go, I know whom to call, and I can easily get rid of it. In exactly the same way, we are able to order a new product. So today, that ease of participation across sectors is the biggest limitation to going circular. Whether we talk from an electronics perspective, textiles, tires, any sector we pick, collection systems are at the heart of material circularity. And today it's a challenge because it is not easy for people to get, to hand over these products. Second, there is very little trust on the existing systems. There are some brands, we have ABG present here, Naresh is from ABG, who are trying to drive this phenomena. Companies like IKEA, H&M to us extend, there is some driving force, but still the trust on the inherent systems is not there. What happens to the product when I give it to a collection system? And that means, do people get to know about the end result of their good deed or an activity that they do? So that for me is the very first learning from the grassroots level, that if the collection systems are not making it easy for people to participate, if they are not bringing in trust, then it is very difficult for people to participate. Let's not expect that participation. Second is from the recycling part. What do you do with the products post-collection? And today, majority of the products are multi-material products. Let's take example of a simple, shirt or, or any t-shirt. It will have polyester, it will have cotton, it will have, some amount of metal. And the segregation of these, if they are impounded in one single fabric, how do you materially segregate and recycle these products? So while there are some interesting technologies which have come to the fore, but scalable solutions are still challenging. And so we are stuck with a kind of a technical and technological solution, issue. And this may lead to better product designing. This may lead to, simpler ways by which these different materials in a product can be segregated. Again, this is a cross-sectoral issue. We talk of electronics, too many materials into one singular device. And then the third is, how do we enable reutilization of recycled content? So any recyclates that you are generating, and are people willing to pay for those additional costs if they are incurred? And that today becomes a huge bottleneck. We are not seeing any traction where people are willing to pay, let's say, a premium, which will allow for financing of collection, financing of recycling, financing of reutilization of material, because there is an inherent cost to going circular. Now, it could be small in certain sectors, but large in others. So until unless we have a very deep discussion and a deep understanding of what these costs are and how do we, create business models which allow this money to come in the system, it will always be a challenge. So this is what we are seeing at a very, very grassroots level, that cost of going circular eventually is the biggest bottleneck. And until unless we know who's going to take up these costs, whether it is the consumers or the brands, what's the distribution of this cost, I don't know how to move this in a significant way.
You mentioned those challenges and obviously the question of the cost, who's going to pay for it eventually. Do you think that that is an area where regulation could actually help? Because I know that in Germany, for example, for electronics, there is a mandatory system now that merchants have to take back old devices. They have to send it to recycling. I don't think we have something for textiles as of now, but is that something that could help get all the players out of that conundrum? Consumers don't want to pay, therefore, producers are reluctant to implement anything.
So regulation has obviously has played a significant role, and we are seeing, again, a great amount of work being done, especially in the European territory. Multiple countries are looking at a whole range of sectors. But again, regulation also has a, how do you enforce the regulation is then in a country like India, while there are great regulatory frameworks, the intent of government to implement is also there. But then the challenge comes on how do you enforce, something which is as vast as this on the kind of people that are there. You are talking of individuals who have waste in their hands, businesses who are generating waste. So how do you enforce such a regulation in a meaningful way? The only answer, that I end up getting when I debate this internally, especially for economies like India, is we have to think of public disclosure. What is happening as of now, put all the data in the public domain. What is the cost of going circular, how it is being. So my belief is, regulation coupled with some level of public disclosure probably will be more helpful instead of just looking at enforcement as a possibility. We find ourselves very challenged on the enforcement angle.
Let me remind our audience again that you can also ask us questions or ask the panelists questions. Please go to Slido. You find the link in the QR code below me here in this little text box. You can post your questions there, and I will then ask them on your behalf to our panelists. Naresh, we talked a lot about regulation, and obviously there's one piece of regulation that came into force in Germany very recently. Angela mentioned that. To what extent does that influence your business model, your operations, your strategic thinking at your company?
I think before I go to that regulatory, I think I just want to add on that to what my co-panelist had already spoken about, that challenge. I think in sustainability, particularly in that Asian and Indian context, one of the things which always get carried away is that sustainability doesn't mean that it has to add cost. And adding cost is not sustainability, because resource efficiency, if it is adding cost, then it's not right sustainable manner. Maybe that we need to look into that stakeholder, where is the maximum leakage and maximum wastage is there. For example, I will give you my own example. One shirt of 280 gram to 300 gram, and the packaging is used almost 170 to 175 gram. Is it sustainable? And if I say that I need to make my packaging more sustainable, first I have to eliminate and reduce that unwanted consumption of packaging. And I can tell you that when we look into that packaging and zero waste to landfill, we find that 175 gram in hand of consumer, only that 50 to 60 gram is important. Why consumer will pay extra if they are not using that packaging? And we were able to reduce and eliminate all that unwanted plastic and packaging in our system. Today it is 72 gram. You know that with that we save a lot of money. And later on, now I'm giving example of how regulatory is important. In India, there is regulatory requirement, plastic waste management. And long back, we eliminated plastic carry bag from our retail store. There was no norms, there was no enforcement. We voluntarily did that. And 2 years later, we had that plastic waste management, and now we have EPR, which is mandatory for that Indian producer, importer, brand owner to declare how much you buy and consume and dispose it. So I think sometimes regulatory unified the framework, they give you a standard to operate within that standard framework. It's enable, but its responsibility come in 3 ways. One, as a consumer, as an individual, how you are consuming the product, and you need to be more sustainable consumption of the product. Second is organization and corporate, how responsibly you are making the product and services which is sustainable. And third is that government and regulatory, where they put that all that unified way of operating framework and standard, where it is playground for everyone to follow. And sometimes that it is difficult for even, because particularly in India, there is organized sector and unorganized sector. So big player can follow that all these things easily, but the small unorganized MSME sector, they also need to be part of it, and then it's beyond regulatory how you involve them. And then I think that all three, regulatory, corporate and organization, and individual and society to consume the product, all three need to be in collaboration and partnership to make this happen. Otherwise, that passing the information from one to other and saying that the corporate are doing it and consumer are not, or consumer are doing and government not, maybe that is not collaborative way to be sustainable.
There's one thing you mentioned, and that is the cost, of course. So adding costs to production is not sustainable, I think you said. Now, let me turn this around. Could one also say that fashion nowadays is too cheap? So the cost for the consumer makes it too cheap. And what I want to allude to is, of course, this idea of fast fashion, of ever faster circles of consumption, because from a lay perspective, one could say is that, a lot of the questions when it comes to collection and recycling, those things that Pranshu mentioned, they would be less pertinent if the cycles would be longer. So if we would simply, use our clothes longer. Is that also a question? Is it just too cheap for the consumer?
I think that, in my opinion, that fashion need to be responsible. These are different terminology that fast fashion, slow fashion, this. Who made this fashion cheaper? Brand and retailer. And ultimately that you make sale, use and throw model is not sustainable, because you are providing that fashion at cheapest cost. Reason because you are sourcing it from that country and region where labor is cheap, where resource is not regulated well. But ultimately it is cost of resources which is adding somewhere else, and fashion cannot be cheaper, because if there is proper compliance and proper way of doing business, then it has some cost. So sometimes people take that compliance cost and bypassing that as a cheap fashion, which is not right. Because that if as a responsible organization, be it manufacturer, be it brand, or be it any other supply chain partner, it's very, very important to understand what is that as a responsible fashion, what is a sustainable model, and make, sell, use and throw, which is so-called that cheap fashion or fast fashion, is not sustainable. And it's ultimately that changing behavior of consumer to do something which is unsustainable. So I feel that we have to reverse the cycle, and we have to get that more usability, more durability, more longevity, when life cycle goes for that longer use. Otherwise that your new product, if it is cheaper than your recycled product, then you are not mitigating natural resource risk, what you have been doing in terms of making it more and more cheaper.
Angela, you have the macro perspective, looking at these things from a also research perspective. Is that true? This trend towards fast fashion, ever shorter cycles of buying and throwing away? Is that something that you actually see happening, or is it more like anecdotal evidence that we have from looking at people around us, maybe the way teenagers consume clothing? Is that a real thing, or is it a myth?
I think we're seeing both at the same time. So of course there is a lot of fast fashion. What we did see we did a representative survey of German consumers, and we do see a rising awareness for sustainability, for social environmental issues as well. And consumers are more willing to also pay more for sustainable textiles. But at the same time, it may be very difficult for consumers to actually know which criteria which textiles fulfill. So I think initiatives like this label, the green button, are very important to orient consumers in their decisions. But I think it also connects nicely to a point Pranshu raised earlier on transparency and these issues of what do we actually know about the costs, the social and environmental costs, because right now they're being externalized a lot of the time. And the prices we see are not the prices that are actually there. I mean, a lot of the costs, you just don't see them in the price tags we have. So I think that's an important point to raise.
So what you're saying is essentially is more a lack of information that is available to the consumer? Because I sometimes wonder if, what people say when they're asked about sustainability and their actual behavior as consumers, they somehow differ. Because I can very well understand that, a lot of people say this is important to us, but then I see companies such as Shein, for example, which is a Chinese company, which is for all intents and purposes seems to be extremely successful, especially with younger consumers in the Western world, doing so well with a model that, as far as I understand it, is not based on sustainability issues. So is it a lack of information to consumers, or is there also a little bit of a gap between stated intentions and manifest behavior as a consumer?
I think it's both, definitely. It may be a lack of information at some points, but it's also, of course, decisions consumers take. So we do see more sustainably produced textiles being sold. So the amount is rising overall, but it's small in comparison to the overall textile market, which is why I think it's an important step to also look into these regulatory issues, to look into corporate due diligence obligations, and to sort of address the purchasing companies and to make them responsible to some extent for looking into human rights and environmental risks throughout their supply chain and for taking measures to mitigate these risks.
Now, Pranshu, both you and Angela mentioned the need for transparency and the need for consumers actually to make or be able to make informed decisions, and how this may also be a bit difficult because, of course, it is not easy to really see, the different production steps. Is that something where technology could help make the entire production chain of, for example, textiles, but maybe also other goods more transparent to the consumer?
So on the technology side, I think now we have a whole range of solutions which have emerged, which are bringing transparency in the whole value chain, including circular value chain. So if we are talking of, for example, tracing where was the waste generated, where did it move, how was it recycled, even these sort of solutions are out there. For example, we have our own tech platform which captures every single piece of information regarding the movement of waste till it has been truly recycled and it has gone back. However, I don't think that solves the problem. It's a good thing to have, but it serves more as a corporate tool because it helps a corporation know that I am not having any social or environmental issues in my own secondary raw material supply chain. So versus let's say a fresh raw material supply chain. So does it help consumer? I'm not really sure. For me, I'm seeing a new model emerging where if we are able to, and there are always costs, it is honestly speaking, from all the work that we have done, it is very only in certain products you can, you have so much value in recycled content that you can offset the cost of collection, recycling, reutilization. Otherwise, in most products, it's a cost. Now the point is, how much cost are we talking? Sometimes it can be as low as, like for mobile phones, we find the cost of circularity is less than less than 0.1% of the selling price of the product. So it is minute. It can be absorbed by the brand. Whereas in other products, it can be very high. What I find working is give consumer a clear visibility of this is the money that they have to pay, and give them the choice of either paying or not paying. Wherever we have tried this approach, that a person knows that they need to pay, let's say, some money extra for it to be collected at the end of its life, and it has contained. Now they have a choice, they want to pay or they may not pay. But the good thing about such an approach is at least now it starts getting registered that there is a cost to it. It may be large or small. Brands don't have to force, or a retailer doesn't have to force anyone to pay for that. But their choice eventually changes behavior. I have been working in this space for Nokia for a very long time, and we always try, what is that nudge point we give to a consumer? Because unless you give a person a choice, it becomes very difficult to drive behavior change. So this is what I have arrived at, especially in the last 3-4 years of work on how do you nudge this consumer behavior towards circularity.
So you all seem to agree, if I understand it correctly, that the most important part is to enable the consumer to make an informed decision, and then he or she can choose whatever they like, basically. Angela, turning to you, but there's also, this idea, and that is obviously based then in regulation, is that it's not just the individual consumer's decision to go for sustainability or not, but there's also some policy decisions that are taken on the national, or in case of the EU, even on the supranational level. Now, ESG, of course, stands for environment, sustainability, social, environment, social, and governance. So it does not only have this environmental component, but also the social and the governance. What do you say to people from countries, producing companies such as India, for example, that say, well, it's actually not the job of a region such as the European Union or a country such as Germany to determine, for example, what kind of labor standards another country is supposed to adhere to? That is kind of a sovereign decision that the Indians should take for themselves, or the Chinese, or whoever else. Is there also kind of a fine line that we're trying to maneuver here between, implementing some standards, but also not patronizing other countries in terms of their policy decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, while I think that consumers are important, and I think we've talked mostly about private consumers, we could also talk about public consumers, and how, for instance, sustainability standards are part of public tenders. I don't think consumers per se are the most important angle to look into this issue, because it's individual decisions. It's a very broad and complex topic. So I think for me, I do see more importance on the regulatory, on the governance side, on addressing the purchasing companies, their corporate due diligence, and also, on, for instance, regulation laws in countries like India or Bangladesh, and in enforcement. So I think what the German and the European law mostly do is target purchasing companies in Germany or Europe, or with a certain volume of operations, with a certain number of employees, and make them responsible to look into their supply chains throughout, and to really look into the human rights and the social, the environmental issues, and so on. That being said, I think what a lot of the regulation about is also in coherence with core ILO standards, which most countries have subscribed to. So, for instance, from the International Labour Organization, on issues of wages, on worker protection. So there is sort of a core standard which most countries adhere to, and which should be the basis also for this. And then I think, and in general, with German Development Corporation is what we look into. It's very much partner-oriented. So the German side will look into it together with the partner, and also see what are the initiatives the partner wants to take. So this is sort of the decisive issue. And I think because we also heard earlier that like a lot of good laws, a lot of good regulatory framework is there. You don't necessarily need to address that, but these enforcement issues can often be the major one. And that's also where German Development Corporation does have instruments it can use with technical cooperation, capacity building to sort of strengthen the capacity to actually enforce these laws. But I think overall for many countries like India, Germany's role is probably not that big actually, because there's so much going on anyway, but there are ways in which German Development Corporation can support. But I think overall, the innovative solutions won't be found by German Development Corporation. They'll be found by the businesses, and there may be some roles or some ways in which Development Corporation can support innovations being disseminated, bringing companies together, sort of supporting on this level, but not actually finding the innovative solutions themselves.
Thank you, Angela. And I have a question actually from the audience that you may want to start addressing, and then we'll turn to the others. And the question is, how do we actually measure if an economic sector, in this case, I guess the textile industry, is circular?
So again, I think we will need to break down circularity into various parts. So one is, okay, are products getting recycled, which is the end of life materiality, circularity. Or are we talking of refurbishment, extension of lifespan? So again, there are so many angles. What I believe is it is measurable. It is not that it is not measurable. So for example, every company today knows how much virgin raw content they are using in their products versus a recycled content. A simple declaration at this end or a globally harmonized reporting mechanism will allow us to measure the material circularity. Purely, what is the material recycled content which has gone into the product. The moment we go into repair, refurbishment, it becomes very challenging because that is very informal still. And that data collection is very difficult. So again, depending on the nature of what we are trying to define, or if we want to say, okay, we want to check how many products are circular because of their design. The design allows, the modularity of the product allows it to be refurbished, repaired, recycled. That is again, so data wherever it resides with large corporations, I believe it is very easy to measure it, and most of the companies are already reporting it in some form. Yeah.
I will also add on to that question. It's possible to measure, and there are certain framework and metrics available. I was working with Alan MacArthur Foundation. They have that circularity matrix, which clearly define how is your input and throughput come through that various way of 7 or 5 R: recycle, reduce, refurbish, repair, etc., redesign. So there are framework. Alan MacArthur is one. Then there is other framework available which has matrix is WBCSDC. They have particularly for textile, it's called CTI. Now they are on that CTI 4.0, where they have further refined it, how that material qualify to be called circular. And they have that closed loop kind of matrix in that. That is second. Third, in India, because most of these framework need to be relevant and customized for the market, because every market has different consumer. And consumer understanding and awareness require a lot of capacity building, which Angela also talk about that how consumer awareness and capacity. India particularly, we work with that FICCI, is one industry body, and we kind of look into that what should be the right circularity matrix for measuring any corporate. Where is the baseline, where is the starting point, and where they need to be setting the target with that 5-6 parameter. So there are framework available, but I think it depends on that how mature these framework are getting for implementation, because it is not easy to understand everyone, and capacity building and familiarization on that matrix and framework is important. We are working with the GIZ Develop PPP project, where we are setting the textile manifesto on circularity especially for India. So I think that different market may have that different understanding on that, and depending on customer understanding and maturity, it can evolve and move to that right matrix for them.
Thank you. Good. We're already getting more or less to the end of our webinar. So I would like to do a final round with our panelists and ask them to look a little bit into the future. So what do you see for the textiles industry, circular economy and sustainability? What will we see coming up there in the next few years? And also maybe what are you hoping for? And I'd like to begin with you, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting question. So I think what I see, or what I'm hoping to see, is a further development, conceptually speaking, but then also practically speaking, on how we see textiles, circular economy in general. We actually also have an evaluation on circular economy, which we're just conducting right now. And I think the most important point from my perspective is to see how to also overcome a sort of siloed thinking, and to also see it like within the German sector. You have many different ministries working on these issues: the Environment Ministry, Development Cooperation, Economic, and so on. And this, I think, really a topic, circular economy, where all of these can come together and sort of develop a coherent approach, a coherent thinking, and think less in sort of the different silos, but sort of develop an overarching approach which addresses the complexity and the multifaceted nature of this issue. So that's what I'm hoping to see.
Thank you. Naresh, from your perspective as a producer, what are you expecting and what are you looking for?
Actually, we are not only producer, we are the brand and retailer in India. We are the largest brand and retail company in India. So from our perspective, what I foresee, textile, garment, and retail as an industry. One, definitely that Gen Z, new millennials, they are looking that the company to be more responsible, and they have flair to buy product which is more sustainable. That I see that early sign of that sustainable product consumption and demand. Second, I think this is very important because this textile industry per se is very laggard in terms of research, innovation, and technology adoption. Now, a lot of pressure is coming from consumer side, regulatory, and other stakeholders. Innovation is the key to drive textile industry towards circularity. Third, I think that it's not about one organization and one company. There is need for capacity building and there is need for industry ecosystem. So I foresee that many players are coming together and they will come together to build industry ecosystem, how you collect, how you segregate, how you sort, how you put R&D and that. And then finally, I think we live in a society. Social part is very, very important because this industry is built, especially in India, not only corporate, but MSME, unorganized sector. The social part, ESG, social is very, very important. How you bring that social element into life and make it more sustainable. The way other industry, you buy a compliance or that home appliance, you have a star rating. But in a textile and apparel, there is no rating. So I think that environment social angle will come into play when consumers start buying and looking for that sustainable product.
Let's hope that that will actually materialize. Pranshu, over to you. What is your perspective on circularity in the textile industries in the years to come?
My belief is, I think a lot of push will come from regulation side, and rightly so. I mean, while there has been a lot of dialogue, and circularity is now a very talked about term, but it has, I mean, similar terms, cradle to cradle, cradle to cradle. I mean, all these sort of things have existed in the past. I think what is needed is a very strong push from a regulatory side to drive this agenda. And you were also earlier asking, whether it's a consumer or a producer or a regulator's responsibility. I think because this is a societal transformation issue, and at the heart of it, it's a fundamental transformation of how society works today, whether it is patterns of consumption or patterns of production. I believe governments will have the biggest role to play here, at least setting the benchmarks, setting the pathways, and then it will be, organized players and large players like corporates who will then define the pathways, and consumers will be the last to follow. If we keep on waiting for the consumer demand to drive the sector, I don't think it's going to happen, because is that sort of marketing happening on sustainability like we see for regular goods, sold on the market? The answer is no. Nowhere, that information dissemination, that campaigning happens on such issues. So I think it's the regulatory push which is going to set the ball rolling. And, some brands, some very large brands will have to play a drive, the driver's role to make it happen. So, while it is challenging, I believe it will happen. And, organizations and governments will really make it happen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We see it's a complex topic, of course, that has to be addressed from different angles: the consumer angle, the production angle, the regulatory angle. Thank you very much to my three panelists here today for providing very, very insightful perspectives from different angles that they come from, that they represent. I would also like to thank the audience, of course. Thanks for being with us again, for listening, for watching this episode. And of course, we will be back next month with another topic that is important to Indo-German business relations. Until then, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.